Welcome to another episode of Looking Around the Corner, the podcast that celebrates the interesting ideas, people, and things. And today, my guest is Dr. Samantha Nazareth. Welcome, Samantha.
Thank you.
Samantha has amazing list of accomplishments. I really even can't go through all of them when I looked at her LinkedIn profile, but in the ones that stood out the most to me is that she's a practicing medical doctor. She is board certified in gastroenterology, so GI. She actually has been an advisor for numerous medical tech or med tech startups and companies, and she is currently the chief medical officer of, make sure I get this right,
I'll give it to you, metaME.
metaME. Yes.
Yeah.
In addition to that, she's my go-to expert on blockchain and pretty much anything blockchain, whether it's medical or non-medical related. And she is really forged a path for professionals that inherently are not necessarily from the computer science or tech industry, but rather being from the medical and healthcare front, into this really burgeoning space, a technology space of blockchain. And, we're definitely going to get into that. You have such an amazing story that, I'd love to hear from you, what your journey was, what are the things that excite you, and, really what do you think the future should be in your eyes?
All right. I'll start with how I even got here in the first place. I would say I think the doctor story might be a boring story because it's very similar probably to a lot of other doctors. I knew right away I love science. I was really obsessive about it. I remember even one field trip was for school. I think it was like first or second grade. We went to the Liberty Science Center, which is a big
Yeah.
museum. And I was born and raised in Hoboken, New Jersey. So it's in Jersey City, which is a neighboring
I'll tell you a story about
town.
Hoboken when I used to live there a long time
Okay.
ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's interesting because everybody's like, "You were born there?" I say, "Yeah, me and Frank Sinatra." um, but the field trips are always like pretty typical. There's Liberty Science Center, Ellis Island, like very classic New York City metro area type
Hmm.
field trip. So this one was Liberty Science Center, and I remember, I think at the end of the field trip, we were allowed to go to the gift shop,
Hmm.
and all the other kids were stopping by the dinosaurs and all the like kind of cool things. And I remember I was like just honed in on this. It was almost like an operation type game, but it wasn't really a game. It was basically like you can build a skeleton and then all the layers of the inside. So like all the organs you can
Yeah.
place where they go. And but it was tangible, right? Like it's something to actually hold and kind of fill in the dots almost. And I definitely was the only person that was really interested in that specific box. So it came to me very early on. I have to say, it wasn't pushed on me by any means. It was something that was um, that I almost grew up into and loved, and even had a placemat with like blood and guts every morning, eating like cinnamon toast crunch. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome.
You were that kid.
I was that kid. I was really, really into just insides, everything insides. So not surprising kind of the field that I ended up into. But if you're interested in insides, usually it's surgery, right?
Yeah,
That's
usually.
and I would say that probably most of my field in gastroenterology, a lot of the gastroenterologists would probably say they really wanted to be a surgeon and then
Hmm.
pivoted sometime in medical school or after. But it's the same story for me. I really was just interested in doing something hands-on, like exploring things that you couldn't really see on a day-to-day. I was always fascinated by things that were unexplored and things we just didn't understand. So of course the stuff that we couldn't see was inside of us.
Of course.
Um, but I had in medical school, and it even like before that, I will say that I signed my life away to medicine very early on because I did the 8-year program at Brown. So I knew like very early that was going to be my career. So that was a teenager, right? And then you're in medical school, and then you have paths thrown at you in terms of options. I did the surgical rotation right when I was supposed to, like for all the wannabe surgeons, right? Like you had to do it, you had to structure it a very specific way. I remember it was like you had to do it like, right? Like you had to do it like after internal medicine in order to like have good solid foundation and footing to be a really good kind of med student for the surgical rotation. So I did all the steps like that. And actually during medical school, my mother had colon cancer. So that was sort of my first look into gastroenterology. I mean, besides having it in pathophys, you don't really get exposure. And then if you were doing your rotation in internal medicine and happened to have a patient that you were following that had an endoscopy, it just wasn't as, I would say, it wasn't as visible as some other specialties like cardiology. I felt like, you were reading EKGs and everything related to cardiology was pushed forward early on, but GI was definitely something that I explored because of just what was going on at home. And I had to learn a lot about it early on, even before I entered clinical rotation. So after doing all the rotations, I decided and did the elective and ended up, choosing that path. I actually really loved liver and ended up doing a transplant hepatology fellowship because I fell in love with the liver, really. I was quite fascinated. I feel like it's an organ that's overlooked most of the time. Like it's not as sexy as the heart and the brain, but
it doesn't pump, it doesn't grow neurons and helps us think. But without it, we're gone.
Yeah, it's so it's just, it's a garbage can, really, right? It's like meant to filter and do all this back end work, or it's not like the front of the house, it's like the back of the house organ.
It's the workhorse. That's what it is.
Yeah, but when you see it doesn't work, there's a lot of problems. And just the pathophys, I was always fascinated about the liver. But then, liver is very intimately intertwined with GI. You have to do GI when you specialize in something like transplant hepatology. So it goes hand in hand. It's not very separate. I mean, you could do liver without doing GI. Like you could just be really, really into hepatology and stay internal medicine. But like to reach that sort of board certification and everything, you have to do both. But yeah, so after that, I will say that once I finished fellowship, so that was 2 fellowships, right? And I ended up staying in New York City area for both residency and fellowship. The world had dramatically changed, I would say, from the time that I signed up for the 8-year program back when I was like 16 years old, and then finishing training like in my mid 30s. It was like, oh wow.
Most people don't really understand how long of a path that is. And then I've gotten those questions when I've advised companies and stuff. They're like, wow, so why do you want to do this now? And I'm like, well, I spent most of my 20s and 30s just doing medicine and getting established and practicing. And it's really, we need a better PR campaign by the medical community as to what exactly doctors go through to get to where they are.
It's tough. It's definitely a tough road. I remember there were definitely some sleepless, tearful nights for various reasons during either medical school. Residency was tough. Parts of fellowship were definitely tough. Luckily I had good peers. You can't really get through it without having good friends and even mentors to help you guide. It's not an easy path, and it's not something that you can do alone. That's really what I would say about like training. It's tough. It's definitely tough.
It does. It takes a toll on you that I don't think people realize at the time, right? And then as you move on in life, and then you think back, you're like, oh my God, how did I go through A, B, and
Hmm.
C to get? And it's yeah, it's one of those. You go through the crucible of that type of training, and then you come out the other side, and you realize that now I'm not the same person that I was when I thought about getting it, getting into this whole thing. And the whole industry changes. By the time
Yeah.
you come out, I was like, man, I was talking to my dad about it, and he's a physician, and I said, this is not what I thought it would be, to be honest with you. I thought it was going to be different, but anyway, that's I think a lot
Everybody
of
has their own
physicians.
story. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, and it wasn't so much me as more the environment had changed by the time I was done. I just started noticing some trends that
Hmm.
I never thought, would be even possible in high school that would change medicine forever. Like when we were done with training, it was either go to private practice or you work for the hospital and become a researcher, or you're basically in academics. It was like academics or private practice.
Hmm.
Academics being, okay, you could be involved in teaching or research, and then private practice is obviously you have your
Sure.
own
Exactly.
office. But there was nothing else like it. But that was sort of what we all assumed to be right going in.
Hmm.
And I started to realize that actually there's definitely a growing sector called technology that seems to be in everywhere, like literally everywhere. It was really hard to ignore. I would say that besides, and obviously the electronic medical record was probably the first door into tech for a lot of doctors, but even outside of medicine, walking around in New York City, it's a walking city, right? So
Hmm.
you you can't help but not notice what's happening around you, stores that are popping up, businesses. And I started seeing a lot of tech businesses in the healthcare sector. So
Hmm.
there was
Yeah.
this intersection of tech and health and wellness, you name it, like anything medical, health, wellness. It was booming in such speed that it was really hard to ignore, really.
It was.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, very difficult. And I, went into private practice after training. So I definitely saw both aspects of medicine. Obviously, when we're training, like we're in the hospital, so we see
Sure.
everything academics, and doing a residency and 2 fellowships. I was in it for a while. So I know what that life was like, but I didn't know what private practice was like until I got there. So that for me was a learning experience too, was just to see how things were so different. Like just your mindset is different when you go into private
Yeah.
practice.
It is.
You don't, it, and of course there's hybrids. So I won't say it's black and white in either direction, but not knowing what it was, it's almost like, again, a steep learning curve as when you start at residency, like, oh wait, I have to learn like a new skill. This is different than anything I've been taught.
And there's
So
there's no there's no real training for it either. There's
no.
business and practice management and just things that honestly you would think that the vast majority of physicians go out into private practice as opposed to academics. So why don't we get people in to teach them some basic foundational, like a mini MBA if you want to call it, for physicians, and just never it still hasn't happened.
No, I wish I would have learned more about it even as early as medical school, just basics of financial literacy. I came out with 6-figure loans. I mean,
Yeah,
I was at Brown
it's
for 8 years, and it definitely was not um, cheap, to put it lightly.
yeah,
And so even managing that debt was, it's just to have it and have it hanging over all the time. It is quite a burden. It's definitely
it's
hard to,
very much. Well, and
yeah.
you imagine that we take on debt, in order to go into a profession that, we're counting on the fact that, okay, we're going to have some employment, we're going to be able to make at least, enough of an income that we're able to make our expenses and save some money, and maybe, take a trip or two in a year, like stuff that I think most anybody else would want in their life, to have that peace of mind. Now imagine all these people that come out and they have debt, and then they go into either careers or jobs where they're constantly laid off or they have unemployment. But guess
Hmm.
what? The debt's still there, and one of the recent things that hearing that student debt may be forgiven under the new administration. I mean,
Hmm.
I paid off my loans last year after
Mm,
many years, and
congrats.
it was
I'm sure
funny
you
because
love to see that zero balance on your.
and I even called the company and I said I want it in writing. Like, you need to send it to me in mail, and I have this just in case, because I couldn't believe it, because it was always there for so many
Hmm.
years. And I feel for people that can't make their salaries or income or whatnot, and they still have to pay all this off. And it's really, I mean, it's a horrible weight to have for such a long
It
time.
is. It is. And it's not uncommon either. And
Yeah.
that's why I think that having some sort of financial literacy or business skills early on, especially since so many medical students are in debt when they come out, is important. Like, you have to do it. Really, I would have done this early, even in high school. I would have been interested in learning a little bit more about it. It's yeah, it sets you up for a different place when you finish. I think
It
when you
does.
have that. And of course there's great, Jim Dale with White Coat Investor. I was following him for a long time, and I learned so much just having a physician perspective on financial issues, and
Hmm.
just getting a grasp. But of course it's always like, I wish I would have had that earlier to set
Definitely.
myself up a little bit in a better position now.
Yeah, I think it's still something that's lacking. I mean, I'm glad that there are all these other physicians that have gone out and built
Hmm.
platforms and sort of had made a brand for themselves, and all these other like residents and fellows and attendings, even like myself. I mean, I went back and did an MBA a couple years ago, and it, if nothing, for the reason that it was packaged and it just changed my viewpoint on how to think about money and business and solving problems. And I don't know, maybe that's something someone needs to come up with, like a startup or some type of something that's more tech savvy, so that we can start this education at an earlier level, like the pre-med level, or like you said,
Hmm.
even from the high school level. I think whether you go into medicine or not, this helps in pretty much all walks of life.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter what you can become an artist, but you may want to know how to make your own art studio or monetize your talent online. There's so many things that go into a person's craft, so to speak. And unfortunately or fortunately, it all revolves around money somewhere at the
It
end of the day.
does. It, and I was even thinking about college debt, and people coming out of college
Hmm.
aren't guaranteed anything, right? And they have all of this debt
Yes.
after college without a job. It's really unfortunate, and it's like growing up, a college degree was like everything, right? You have to get a
Hmm.
college degree, and now it doesn't guarantee anything. It has to be okay. Now what? Like, what other skills are you going to be using? Because just having a bachelor of arts or science isn't enough anymore.
It's and even this year, particularly with the COVID and the lockdowns and students not being on campus, and everything's virtual, if there is anything at
Hmm.
all. It really makes you wonder. You're like, well, what exactly am I paying for? If I'm
Hmm.
let's say a parent, I have two kids. We save up for their college, like I think any other parents that are able to. And but I keep thinking about it, and I'm like, they both want to be creative. They both want their own YouTube channels. They both want to make like they're artists are at heart. I mean, they're They like science. They like, I mean, when I was a kid, all I loved was science, like every space and astronomy and biology. I mean, just complete science geek. And no artistic bone in my body. And these kids are complete opposite, and they're making like CD or tracks and whatnot. And I'm thinking like, what is a college education really going to get these two? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
they should get it. I think maybe just to check the box, unfortunately, but that's all it is. It's like checking a box nowadays. And the money is that's involved.
Hmm.
I mean, imagine 50,000 a year, let's just say. Imagine what you could do for your child for $50,000 a year, or for other kids, or someone who doesn't have the means. It just seems like such a unbelievable system that people have been paying into without any guarantee. I mean, if someone came to you and said, "Hey, I want you to invest 50,000 in my company," the first thing out of your mouth is like, "Okay, so how am I gonna make a profit? Like, what's my ROI on this? When am I gonna get my money back?" We don't even ask those questions when it comes to higher education or college education.
Right, right. And that really strikes to the need for you need these other skills. Like,
Definitely.
you need to understand what debt is and what debt isn't. All the aspects of financial literacy needs to be given out, taught early, very early. And yeah, and I take back my initial that it's in med school. It probably should start in high school,
I think
especially
so.
before taking on debt in college. I mean, I remember those promissory notes I had to sign
Oh
every
yeah,
semester, and
I
it
remember
was just
those.
like, oh my goodness, going to the loan office, and you had an exit meeting as well when they compiled, and I had 8 years worth. I said, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm coming out with that number of, and the amount of debt. It's scary. It is very scary.
It's scary. It's scary, and it's. I really hope that there is student debt forgiveness with this new administration, because it's just this weight that just keeps people down. And psychologically and from a mental health perspective, it's a huge deal. And frankly, it's what we hear about in mental health, and people being anxious and depressed about what's going on financially in their lives. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much more that no one talks about. They don't know where to go and whatnot. And I mean, when I wrote that last check, I mean, I'd never had that feeling before in my life. I was like, I don't owe them anything else. Like, it was so weird. Like, my wife had to be like, I was like, just check my math on this. Like, I don't owe them a nickel, right? And she's like, no, you're done. And it was like, I was like like in the clouds. I was like, wow, this is great. I don't owe someone the money. And
Hmm.
it's a great feeling, at the least.
Yeah, yeah. It just shows that there's so many other skills that we have to learn. Even if we become doctors, we have to learn
I know.
other things besides medicine. And it's almost because we put our heads down and just study for so long, and then obviously residency, and if a fellowship is done, it takes obviously a lot of your time. There's really not much place to learn any of these things
Yeah,
until maybe you're on an elective or you're done. It's just doesn't, and for good reason, right? You're training to be a doctor, right? You're not
exactly.
doing something else. This is what it's meant to do. You're supposed to do all the hard work. But then you realize how far behind, like I realized I was so far behind my friends from
Hmm.
undergrad, and all the skills that they've had in terms of like interviewing, negotiating. They had already been through all of
Definitely.
it by the time I was out. And I was really in awe. Like I felt like a baby basically that needed a lot of coddling, and the food has to be brought to me because I can't survive on my own almost.
I was blown away when I first started learning about marketing. Like, what is marketing, right? And what I thought it was, all throughout my life until I started actually learning about it, I realized I was completely wrong. For me, in my mind, I was like, okay, there's ads, and they want to say do something, and that's it. That was marketing. And then I really started learning about it, and I started asking people who, did marketing for a living, whatever. And I realized, my God, why did we not learn this? Like, this is so
Mm-hmm.
important. There's a certain scientific rigor even underneath it, like how, net promoter scores are calculated, how calculate customer acquisition cost. I mean, there are metrics there's quantifiable sort of methodology in it. And I thought to myself, I was like, this one thing, if we had learned just this one thing, I think it would have really helped a lot of people, regardless of whatever you go into. And I thought about that and what you just said right now about, like, you spend so much time just figuring out what you have to do for your specialty or whatnot. So then how does someone like yourself, who, you said you had a lot of debt, you spent a lot of time in training, how does someone go from private practice to the chief medical officer of a company? Because a lot, for a lot of people, I mean, I have a friend who's a lawyer, and he's in the same rut, because he's like, I did all this work to become partner in my firm, and then, but I think I'm kind of done with it. Like, it's not fulfilling and whatnot, and I want to do something else. But it but by that time in life, you have other responsibilities. You're sort of
Mm-hmm.
embedded in your professional career or whatnot. How do you make the change? It's not easy.
Yeah, I think everybody has a different reason, and mine wasn't unhappiness. It really came from a place of curiosity.
Hmm.
I've always been a very curious person. I've been that person. I mean, my mom would tell you that I was always the why person. Like, why does this happen? Why is this happening? And as a child, obviously, that's really annoying, I think, for anybody around that child,
There's
especially when there was no Google to verify
no
anything.
iPads, right? Back then.
Nothing.
At
Because I
least.
could have sat with Google and had all my answers, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
you look to whoever's around you, the adults, basically, to be the source of all truth.
I know. Yeah, I know what you mean.
So I was always that child. I did things. I was very fearless, I would say. Even physically, I did things that most people probably wouldn't have done. I just always had this like adventurer type spirit. So I think that already, and I'm a big observer of people and the environment. I love going into let's say, let's say the most uncomfortable situation, which is like a networking event. And I could just be there and just observe people for the entire time and be very entertained.
It is pretty entertaining, actually. Like, if you're a fly on the wall and you're just like watching, and you're just like, I wonder, let me see. I think they're talking about this, but we'll just make it up.
Hmm. But you realize you just notice things that are happening if you already have that quality about you. Like,
Hmm.
I'm an observer. I'm very curious at heart, and those talent, skills, flaws maybe, they don't go away. And I've always had that in me. So after doing the work, right, to get to, okay, I'm done, yay, get your board certification, you get to practice. I think what I started to realize was that, just like I said, the world was changing, and either you want to change with it or you kind of get left behind.
Hmm.
And I never wanted to get left behind anywhere. I played sports. I was not good at sports ever. Like, you've never seen me in person, but I'm 5'1" and 100 and something pounds. So there are very few sports that physique is really good for. But I was always just passionate and had the enthusiasm, so I was allowed on these sports teams. Um, so in essence, it's like, well, you could start out as a beginner anywhere, really, if you have the
Hmm.
energy and enthusiasm. So that's sort of the mindset you have to think of changing from. And maybe you don't even have to change, really, because I'm still in medicine, but
Hmm.
just having that beginner mentality with enthusiasm and energy, even if you feel like you don't have the skill set yet. right? I mean, in sports, like you either have it or you don't really. Like
Yeah,
it's
it shows
it's
up
hard.
pretty quick.
Yeah,
It
like I
seems like
can't grow.
it seems like you have, I think, what is it called? It's like the beginner's mind. There's a name I think for it, like I think it's called Shoshin. I have to look it up, but it's like this mental model, like people like yourself have of the world, and I guess I have it to a certain extent because I'm always thinking about, okay, something new, or curiosity, is
Hmm.
always there, and you realize, I mean, I realized after a while that I'm probably an oddball thinking this way. Like it seems like a lot of people don't think that way. I think, for whatever reason, they don't, or they're okay, they're comfortable,
Hmm.
in their situation, or sometimes they don't like their situation, but it's like a Stockholm syndrome or something. Like it's like learned helplessness, and they're like, okay, you know what? That's it. This is my fate, and it's. I love that you have that mindset, because I wish more people had that, and I don't know if this is something that you can teach or train someone to have, or is this just innate? You're just kind of born with it. What do you
I
think?
don't know. I think it's a little bit of both because innately I was always an extreme um it's like those adventurer people, that are always skydiving, bungee jumping, that thrill seeking.
Yeah,
I always had that in me, that I was always
yeah,
kind of like that thrill seeker. I really love like, ooh, all this stuff that just gets a rise. And, like I said, mentally or physically, it doesn't matter. And, um, but it's not, there needs to be a yang to the yang, right? Like
hmm,
everybody can't be like that. There's people that I get along with very well that are deeply rooted and
hmm,
are like order, structure, and there's a certain safety to that. So I could appreciate that. It's just not who I am as
yeah,
a person. So if I'm being true to myself, I'm not, I'm more of a freedom seeker, adventurer seeker, thrill seeker than the structured person, or the person that wants to be doing the same thing every day. That was
yeah.
never me.
And I think so that played into your curiosity, like you said, about
Yeah.
the tech world and medicine and tech as this sort of newer construct, almost like that we weren't
Yeah.
really trained in as physicians initially.
And I'm sure that will change that now. I've noticed even at my alma mater, there's a digital health elective, which I was,
Wow.
wow, like I wish that
Yeah.
was there when I was, but it wasn't a thing. It wasn't as popular or even really in your face back when I was in med school. But
Mhm.
we're starting to see little sprouts of that in the education during med school. So um, it came later, right? It was just, it was with the time dictated. So when I came out of training, that's when I started seeing the changing landscape of medicine, and in so
Mhm.
many different levels.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I was like just curious. It came from, to answer your question from a little while ago, it came from a place of curiosity, and I had to feed that curiosity at some point. So I asked people. That's really the first step, I think, is asking the people who are around you that have or are doing interesting things. I remember I reached out to people that I was in training with that were doing really unusual I wouldn't say it was straight non-clinical, but they were definitely using their degree in a tech capacity.
Hmm. Yeah,
And tech,
a non-traditional path, which is what
yeah,
they used to call that when you didn't go
right.
right into practice. You're non-traditional,
Yes, yes. I hate that word though. Like
I don't like it
that
either. I
phrase.
never liked it because I said, well, I mean, like, I think about, like, mathematically, it's just a statistical function. It's like most people go here, some people go there. Well, it doesn't mean they're abnormal. It just, like,
Right.
it, and the not, and I feel like he was very biased because the people that are teaching us, they didn't do any of that stuff. They're all, kind of pigeonholed into one way of thinking and one way of doing. And I think just exposure to, like, when I was a fellow, it took until fellowship that I remember McKinsey and Company,
Mm-hmm.
management consulting firm, they were recruiting at the Johns Hopkins campus in Baltimore, which is where I did my fellowship. And so they just randomly emailed me out of the blue, and I thought it was like a spam email, and I was like, McKinsey, and I looked it up, and I was just like, I don't know why they want to talk to me. And the guy took me out to lunch, the representative, and he said, well, we're doing this because we want you to come work for us. And I was like, wait, what? Like, it totally was left from left field. And he explained, how management consulting works and why they would hire someone like me. And to be honest with you, it was very, very appealing. But at the time, I just had other responsibilities that wouldn't allow me to travel as much, and as much as they are required to travel. But man, if someone came to me like the beginning of med school or the end of undergrad, or I think I would have hopped on in 2 seconds. I would have been like, oh, so you're going to pay me to go around the world and meet people and do business for you guys? Oh, great, I'll do it. You know, and McKinsey has such an amazing alumni network that they're in so many other industries and fields and stuff like that too. So I just thought that it was I was like, why am I learning about this at the end of my training? Like, why couldn't I
Right.
learn this so much earlier?
Yeah. I mean, management consulting was definitely something that I remember was an option that other people were pivoting to or towards in residency. Just like you said, McKinsey would recruit, and there were a couple of people that ended up doing it.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know what I mean, now I have an idea of what consultants do, but back then I didn't really quite understand what that all
Yeah.
meant.
No, it's funny because I've become a big believer that the younger you are and the more range of stuff you can get ever exposed to, from a positive standpoint in your life, just anything, experiences and things and arts and music and science, and it doesn't matter what it is. But as a child, that imprinting that you get, I think it has such a long range effect that we don't even know how to quantify that at this point.
Hmm.
And I feel like that curiosity that you have as that kid, it almost it grows, right? It's like it grows like a plant and then a tree, and it has all these crazy, branches and stuff like that. And I wish I wish industries were more like that, where they would be okay with the people going through them, their training and work, that they think a little bit non-traditional, as they say, right? That we talked about, and because that's what actually makes the leaps, in innovation, technology, industries. It's not the people that always think the same. It's the
Hmm.
people that are the ones that say, yeah, I don't know, I think I'm going to go this other way. And you fail, and you fail. It's fine. I mean, failure is that's I think good. I think you at least tried something and you learn from it. But I I I wish we encourage more people to just take risks and not kind of vilify them and not call them non-traditional or whatever pejorative terms there are about that. Uh, so hopefully that changes going forward.
Well, we're taught to not take risk as well as
Hmm.
physicians. It's really not in our training for good reason, again, that we have to evaluate all the data in front of us, and we have to make a decision based on the information, and it's really to avoid risk, right? Like, you're always trying to avoid anything risky in the
Yeah.
end. So it's in almost direct conflict with an entrepreneurial type spirit of, let's do something even if it's risky. It's so against what's being taught, uh, again, for good reason, how to become a physician and make clinical decisions on life and death issues. But yeah, that's definitely not, um, that type of mindset. It doesn't isn't taught by any means in
Yeah.
medical training.
I think so I'm curious, again, going back to our sort of discussion on how did your path end up in tech?
Yeah, so curiosity, killed the cat, right? Not yet. But the curiosity led me to have conversations with people that did do that, non-traditional path. And I remember one in particular, and really, I mean, people are helpful, right? Like this idea that, oh my God, I don't want to, especially if you're reaching out to someone who knows you. So it's not really a cold call or a cold email. It's someone in your network that maybe you're not speaking to every single day of your life, or you haven't been in contact with, but they know you and they like you enough to jump on a 10-minute, 15-minute call. I found that people were more than generous with their time when I was starting to kind of open my eyes and say, what else is out there and what's going on in the tech space. So I started with that. It was really reaching out to the people that I knew. And again, very helpful information, basically where I should go for events and networking. And I hate saying that in COVID because obviously that all has changed now, but it really then led to a lot of in-person networking. So going to events. I remember someone said, they're like, Sam, if you wanted, you could be at a networking event related to health tech or digital health every single night of your life if you wanted that.
Well, you're in New York, right? So
yeah.
I mean, it's the old adage used to be in New York. I lived there for 2 years, and it used to be you could just eat at a different restaurant every night, and you'd never see there twice. And I think now the health tech is like that too.
Yeah, and I had no idea. I thought it was just Silicon Valley, Boston.
Yep.
And obviously now that's changed, but back then that's what I thought. I had this impression of New York being just, all right, it's financial, fashion, media, very discrete sectors and not tech. But that was completely false. It was so false. And I needed someone to tell me that, basically, to say, here are the things that you need to go to, just start showing up. Even if you have nothing to say, at least you're in the vicinity or in the presence of other people that are in that field that you're interested in.
I mean, you set yourself apart immediately, right? Because some of these events you go to, and where I used to go, down in Atlanta pre-COVID times, you may be one of the only few physicians or MDs that do what you do and have a certain skill set or interest or whatnot. And then, there will be other engineers and, finance people or whatnot. And all of a sudden, you're like the big fish in the small pond, as opposed to when you go to, medical conferences and stuff like that. It was like, well, everybody has an MD or a DO or something like that. So it's a great way to differentiate, to go to these events. Just being there, like your presence is differentiation enough.
Yeah, I would say that I definitely did not feel like I was the big fish by any means, because there were people that were like, on company number 5 with big exits. So I definitely almost felt like the little fish. But it was, again, like we were talking about, having that beginner mindset. I was a student again, and I loved being a student, really. Like, I could be a student my entire life if that was a job.
I think we
love
are
learning.
Right? In a way, we are those of us who are willing to do different things. You have to. I mean, no one gives you the playbook, I realized.
Yeah, it's that constant learning mindset. So definitely, it led to me going to a lot of in-person networking. I wouldn't say networking events. They were events that happened to have like people chatting afterwards, before and afterwards. It wasn't like labeled as such a networking event. It was, hey, do you want to hear like a cool panel or some cool speaker speaking about something within digital health, health tech? Those terms are so confusing every time I use them.
They are.
I know some people like one versus the other, so I kind of always throw both just in case. There's e-health, m-health. It's all an umbrella term, right? Like, it's like saying I love science. Okay, well, what in science do you like?
Just throw a pebble in the air, it'll land somewhere on
Yeah,
this huge field, you know?
there's a huge world underneath. Let's pick one term, digital health, right? And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize that. But going and speaking to people, going to these events and speaking to people, that there is a lot that falls underneath digital health or even
Mm-hmm.
healthcare technology. And I think so for something tangible, right? If you go to these events, the other thing is to get involved with the events just to help out, really. Like you said, if you're the only doctor there, you could be on a panel, you
Mm-hmm.
could be a judge on, during one of these pitch events, especially if you're the only doctor, you provide that clinical expertise to say that, okay, this solution does or does not work in a clinical setting. Because how many companies have you seen that once they're out and perhaps they did some market validation, but at that stage, it actually doesn't work in anybody's clinical workflow as a physician.
Oh yeah,
So you're
that's
kind of
very
that
common.
person. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
very
becomes
common.
very common. Well, it's like technology looking for the solution as opposed to the other way around, right? Where we
Hmm.
have this problem, can you help us? Type of thing.
Yeah. There's a lot of solutions to non-problems, as I say.
Exactly. I
So
think
as
because I think engineers tend to they love that creation that they have, or they just geek out on some new algorithm or some new advance, and we're like, no, actually, we'll take what you have off the shelf and let's just see if that works first.
Mhm.
We don't need the bleeding edge of this or that.
And a lot of it is timing, and
Hmm.
that's really important. I have to acknowledge that there are companies that would have done better if they just waited for the market to be ready for it. So there's that aspect of timing,
Hmm.
having the market validation, all these aspects. But as a doctor, I would say you do bring that clinical expertise to a company that, especially early on, probably they don't have any physicians on their executive board to give that clinical mindset or even perspective on saying, okay, yes, this is something that would work.
Yeah, I think, and it seems like there's a need, at least now in COVID times, so to speak, right? Where we don't have these in-person networking events, and it's everything's guarded, rightfully so. And even after enough of the vaccine is distributed and administered, there's still going to be a little bit of a cautious, hopefully a little bit of a caution in people getting together like the way we used to. I think it's going to take a while. I think it's an opportunity for the emergence of platforms that can put together, technical and non-technical experts. Um, I've seen a few of them because I'm sort of in the same boat. I have a few startup ideas where I'm sitting there like, okay, now I hit a wall because I have no idea how to actually either code this or, you know, build a prototype or whatnot.
Mhm.
And it would be so nice to go into like this one site, one platform, be like, it just matches you up and says, oh, this is what you're looking for. Well, here's someone that can do this for you. And I think those kind of opportunities are out there for someone that wants to build something like that, because
Mhm.
I think as time progresses, more and more healthcare professionals, particularly physicians, they're really looking for maybe a different path or something that gives them a different type of meaning for what they do. And everything is tech now, right? I mean, anything you
Mhm.
can. I mean, my coffee mug talks to my phone, and it keeps my coffee warm. I mean, I would never have thought I would have a coffee mug like this in my life. So if everything's going that way, it doesn't make sense not to go with that flow. And I feel like if we had more resources to connect with the tech community on the prototyping and infrastructure side, it could be amazing. I mean, there could be some really useful solutions that come out as opposed to the hundreds that come out, every every year or two, and we're like, no, we don't really have any use for this.
Hmm. Yeah, and you're starting to see this crop up globally, where other cities are becoming these innovation hubs like Berlin, Tel Aviv, Shanghai. There's different areas now around the world that are having that sort of spark where they're melding in the capital with the
Mm-hmm.
talent and the resources, obviously legally too. Like that helps, any laws that help foster that sort of innovation for that location. And I think it's not going to stop. We will continue to see other cities pop up outside of the US that are really interested in doing innovative things as well.
You, as you were going through this journey of, I guess, pivoting or transitioning into your, the tech roles you have, were you, did you meet a lot of resistance, or any resistance in saying that, well, you're a physician, stay in your lane type of thing? Because I've heard this, I've heard some
Mhm.
physicians tell me this, and I don't know how common it is, to be honest with you, but it, I get the feeling sometimes that there are some groups or some parties out there that they don't really want you to get into their space. I don't know if they feel threatened or whatnot. But have you had that type of experience, or have you heard
I
of it?
haven't. Yeah, personally, I haven't. I've heard that has happened, but I thankfully, yeah, I haven't
Okay.
experienced it. And if they, I don't take offense to anything. I have pretty thick skin. So if they did say that, I would just say, it's not for everybody. I get it. Like this changing, integrating, melding of two worlds is not for everybody because it's not a clear cut path.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you do these steps and then you get here, because that's really what medicine was like. It's
Mm-hmm.
you complete undergrad, med school, residency, fellowship. Like it was a very clear path. And sometimes the unclear is not really attractive, right? Like this, let's see, if I go here, again, you may not get an ROI and you have to be okay. Like you
Mm-hmm.
have to kind of be okay with doing things that really don't materialize. But I found, now being in the space for a good couple of years, that you just have to be patient. It's not as cookie cutter as medicine is, where yes, you put your 4 years into undergrad, your 4 years into med school, and things will materialize at this set amount of time. Sometimes things don't materialize immediately, but
Mm-hmm.
perhaps a
Yeah.
couple of years down the line, they end up doing. Like I said, timing is everything, especially outside of medicine. And you just have to be. And I'm probably the most impatient person ever. And I've had people tell me to be patient. That I've definitely been called
Yeah.
out on. But I do agree with them because I am impatient and I'm like, I'm doing all these things and nothing is happening.
Yeah. It feels like that sometimes. Well, I could tell you, this podcast, just launching this thing, I launched it like a few years ago, and for various reasons, I had to take it down. And now relaunching it, it is a very humbling experience contacting people to try to be guests. Just, you're kind enough to say yes. You get all types of answers. I mean, just it runs I mean, everybody's for the most part very nice, but you feel like, wow, I feel like kind of how I did when I was trying to get my first observership as a pre-med student back in undergrad. Like you're sort of like you're sort of politely begging, like, hey, can you come on? I think this is
The
going to be a
little
really big
voice,
thing
like,
one
hey
day.
there.
Yeah, it's humbling. That's the best word to describe it. But I like it though, because it's a very again, if you have that student, that beginner's mindset, then you can stomach it. If you don't, though, your ego gets in the way. And I think as physicians, some of us develop an ego. They're like, well, I am Dr. So and so, and I am, and it's not just physicians. I have lawyer friends that have talked about this. As people kind of ascend in their rank, so to speak, there's that ego really grows out, and you have to really
Mhm.
you got to really contain it or channel it a different way. And I think if people did that, they may find more happiness in what they're doing than necessarily complaining about. Um, but when when you were going and getting into the tech space and whatnot, you mentioned all these different hubs now, like the innovation hub and whatnot. You traveled a lot. I know you've told me in the past for both career and just for the love of traveling, I guess. What is where, and you named some cities, but where are the go-to hubs both right now and in the US and internationally, that as we kind of emerge from the COVID, pandemic and people start traveling cautiously, at least, where should one focus if you want to launch a company, you want to find investments? Silicon Valley, to me, my impression is doesn't. I think they look for different things. I'm not sure they're the most digital health friendly ecosystem there is, but I'd love to know your thoughts.
I really can only speak to what other people in the field are doing, because I've really established myself in New York City, personally and professionally. So I can only assume things that are happening outside of New York City. I will say that, yes, for hubs in the US, from what other people are doing, Boston, Silicon Valley, New York City, and then now also Nashville, Austin, Denver. There are other cities that are creeping up that are establishing themselves as, hey, you could do this. And it really you need the melding of a couple of things. You need like I said, you need talent, right? So the talent has to exist close by. And that could be talent from an engineering standpoint, a business standpoint, clinical, but really clinicians are everywhere. So that's not really the rate limiting step in terms of finding talent, but it has to be a place that has some sort of talent. So usually there are major universities close by. And hence the reason why those, right, West Coast and Boston have really led, because they have some major institutions that really attract talent. And then on the other, besides talent, is capital, and that's where New York kind of rises, right? Like everybody knows there's money.
Yeah.
There's investors, there's people that want to put money into these companies. So you have to find a place that also has the capital to infuse in these companies. So again, like these non-3 cities, right? Not West Coast, Boston. West Coast is really like Silicon Valley, etc., because it's now really expanding beyond that. But Boston, New York City, but these other cities that have creeped up as, hey, we can also be a place, have the talent, and provide resources in order to find that. Now that everything is remote, things have been more equitable in that sense of versus now to everybody, that you don't have to live in cities to get something done. But I will say, if you're starting out somewhere, it's definitely hard to start out, I would say, and not meet someone in person and establish those. Yes, I've established relationships this year all remotely, but it's almost like, well, eventually we will have to meet in person. I don't think Definitely. That will ever go away. That there's something in person that can't be replaced ever by this. It just, we're not there yet. Maybe, when we have digital avatars and we can interact in a digital space, fine. But for right now, we're not there yet. And we do have to convert that virtual experience to an in-person interaction. So at some point, yeah, you might have to go to these cities and interact with people. Perhaps it's not that you have to live there every day, right? That's different than what it used to be.
Yeah.
But making these in-person connections will still be important. So that I would say is still, and then globally, technology, right? Like these guys will probably change. I would say like, yeah, I have to like, you know, have the hair in a specific way to like cover these guys. But
Oh, yeah. Well, just that,
oh
you know,
yeah,
these are
there's that too. You can pull it off. My head is is tiny that I can never put anything on top. It just falls off. I need like kid size hats and sunglasses. So, um, but yeah, so outside of the US are like those cities that I mentioned. So Tel Aviv, Berlin, Shanghai have really become other non-US innovation hubs, and a lot of great companies are coming out from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, you know, it's definitely, don't sleep out like on these other countries. In order to be really familiar, like to become sort of an expert in something that you've tended towards, right? Like 3D printing, IoT, like you name it, you really have to look outside the US. Like also, you just
Yeah.
can't be honed in on only US centric companies.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And when you were, I guess, as you were making your way through the, you know, the health tech or digital health sort of ecosystem, and how did you know that you wanted to, you know, become CMO of the company you're at right now? But more than that, you know, we have to get into a discussion about blockchain, because that, you know, that's an area where you know a lot about it, and I feel like there's so much hype and misinformation about blockchain, even on a like non-technical level, just like what it is, what can it be used for, what it is really not. I think you're one of the best people to ask about it, especially, you know, healthcare applications, because it seems like people like to just slap on terms sometimes when they're founding a company, and then you realize, well, I'm not really sure what this actually does.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what's your take on that?
So I'll speak to the blockchain. So blockchain has speaking of marketing, it has a very bad PR.
Very,
Um,
very bad.
yes, it's. I will start by saying that blockchain does not equal Bitcoin, though right now Bitcoin is in, you know,
Yeah, it's on a
in the
tear.
limelight. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
So this, for right now, it's on everybody's minds, but that wasn't always the case. And even the beginnings of Bitcoin, people will remind you that there were a lot of illegal things that were happening using Bitcoin.
Great way to launder money.
Right.
Very
But
great way to launder money. Yeah.
as also I say, the internet can be used to do a lot of illegal things.
Yes.
Like I could be doing something illegally right now, but I'm choosing.
I think we're having a little bit of connection issues.
A little bit.
Samantha, you there?
Thank you.
We might be frozen. Well,
To repeat it.
all right. So, sorry, what were you saying before we had a little technical glitch there?
Oh yeah, sure. So I was saying that it's not what the technology does, it's what we
Mm-hmm.
do, what us as human beings do with the technology, right? Because the
Yes.
technology doesn't do anything. It's what we do with it. So like I use the example of the internet. Well, yeah, I use the internet to send emails
Mm-hmm.
and do this podcast, but not everybody is doing legal things on the internet. Does that make the internet bad?
No, definitely
Right?
no.
Exactly. It's just it's a tool. So you have to decide, how do you want to use that tool? Do you want to
Definitely.
use it to destroy, or do you want to use it to create? Because using the same tool, you could do either, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, to me, the internet, the power of it is that it essentially amplifies human behaviors and proclivities. So if like you say, if you're a person who's positive and you want to do positive things and build and create, there's a ways for you to do that on the internet. And then just the complete I mean, it's philosophically, it's the complete range of all human possibilities can happen through the internet, which is,
Mhm.
I mean, that's revolutionary. But in the same light, when you think of like these type of technologies like blockchain, I think there could have been a little bit better PR about what it really its power is.
It that's what I think. It has a bad PR attached to it, and we'll see. Hopefully the tide will change, and when we have other things other than cryptocurrencies to show
Hmm.
how can this
Yeah.
actually affect and really change for good. But I would say that if anybody's interested, obviously Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, his, her, or their white paper would be an interesting place to start. But it is just one application of blockchain, right?
Hmm.
Is creation of a cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin is one of them. But beyond that, right? So take cryptocurrencies out of the equation. So why is it even interesting for healthcare? And I think that the basic way that I explain blockchain is it's creating a history that we can all agree on without having to trust each other.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, okay, well, what types of data points are important to historically track? And then that's when your mind expands. Okay, well, I could think of many points in healthcare. And obviously, the thing that's easiest for us is to think of something that affects physician and patients, right? Because that's
Hmm.
that's what's in our face mostly. So on the physician side is, I would say, credentialing. Not just for employment. Since I'm in private practice, I've had to do insurance credentialing multiple times because I've changed locations, even within the same city.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
I could tell you that I wouldn't wish that upon anybody to do insurance credentialing. So the people who do insurance credentialing that are non-physicians, I have a lot of respect for, because I've done it and it's not fun.
It's painful, very
It is
painful.
very painful. And I will tell you this, I did it, and because of a glitch on their end, on the payer end, and it was a top 3 insurance payer,
Hmm.
I was out of network for 9 months.
Wow.
And I did all the paperwork that was necessary. And trust me, I am very, very careful about where to check these boxes, because I know any mistake can lead to, basically unraveling of everything. And it was a pair that I've been a part of. So it literally was just a change of location. But because of their end, through some, again, human error, I was out of network. I spent tons of time on the phone, um, taking down names, sending handwritten letters, you name it, to the point where I actually ended up showing at their headquarters. I looked them
Wow.
up. Yeah, I know. And if anybody has ever done this, which
I don't know of any physician that's ever done that.
I
You're the first.
I was so determined to get this error fixed that I looked up their headquarters and I said, "Oh, they're also in New York City." So I will show
Convenient.
up at their I will show up at their headquarters. And of course, if anybody has entered one of these big buildings in New York City, you can't just walk in.
Exactly.
You have to go through security. And so I just presented myself as who I am. And I said, but remember, I was on all those phone calls. So I had people's names. So it wasn't like just this random, me person coming in like, oh,
Yeah.
I need this fix. It was, I have been in correspondence with this person. You can call them up. I have this paperwork. I just want to drop it off. Just so I did all of that. but it took me doing all of that, which obviously was taking away from time that I should be spending on patient care.
A lot
So
of
there's
time.
that. I was out of network. So patients that were trying to find me in network, they were like, what happened? You were my doctor and now you're out of network. And I'm like, it's not because of me. Trust me, I'm not choosing to be out of network. It's the insurance company.
God.
So but you could think of like they just had data points stored in a specific way, this would not have happened. It literally would not have happened.
What do you think is the bottleneck in all of this, in the sense that, do you feel like insurance companies or just, other, industries or whatnot, do you feel like there's a hesitance in adopting this type of technology, or do you feel like people that are coming up with these ideas, like startups and, early stage companies, they're not able to elaborate, like, okay, what is the problem we're solving here? Because I imagine that all the time and effort and resources that you spent, right, as one person trying to sort of correct your good name in the standing of the the insurance, the payer, and the for your patients, number one, most people would not have done. Or most people would not have even done even a tenth of that. Second, I'm not sure the payers really understood the value of your time, nor maybe they didn't care. They're like, oh, okay, she showed up to our headquarters with all this stuff. Okay, maybe we should listen to her, and okay, let's correct the glitch. I feel like the incentives matter so much in business that, what can be done to incentivize, I mean, industries, very conservative industries like insurance, to adopt this type of technology, which, I mean, it would make your life easier, it would make your patient's life easier. It would honestly make a lot of people's lives easier, even their lives, the insurance, companies. And yet, I feel like there's a hesitance depending on what sector you're talking about. If it's healthcare, it's like, let's keep pushing this boulder up a hill and let's have an avalanche come down at the same time. It feels like that at
It
times.
has to be a great pain point. Like you said, the incentives have to be aligned in order for something like this to help and to be adopted. I will say that the payers are also feeling pains of fraudulent claims and the like, right? I think something like blockchain, again, it's history, and it's history that you can agree upon without having all these middle
Checks and balances or
people,
whatever. Yeah.
right? Yeah, it's just, if anybody's like an old school accountant, I always say, like, do you remember what they used to do with ledgers? They would like put numbers with
Oh
this
yeah.
person and this person. That's all it is, except it's data, right? So that could be either a historical event, it could be item that could be a data point, or it could be a person that could be a data point. So if you think about all of the admin waste that's happening now in healthcare, it really is about managing data. So just take blockchain out of the equation, right? And if we can manage that data, where it's flowing, who's receiving it, how is this verified as fraudulent or not? Because even, I do acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of fraudulent things that happen in healthcare. And also along those lines are a lot of hacks. I don't know if you saw, but someone, I think it was, I forget where, but someone was actually harmed because of a hospital hack. Like someone hacked into their
I've heard of this. I
electronic
don't know the
medical
details, but
record.
I've heard of this. Yes.
Yeah, so now it's like affecting people. At first it's like, okay, there's just a waste of money, but now it's actually impacting people who are hospitalized, right? If the system is down for a great number of time and it's held hostage, people are affected. So there's issues with the record keeping, with keeping it also secure, right? And safe, that it's not all centered around in this like one honeypot where anybody can kind of get in there and just take it all down.
And
It
the
hits
security
everybody.
structure, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was gonna say the security on the back end of, the actual infrastructure for it, the IT security, it's really bad. I mean, it seems like
Hmm.
we have probably like the one of the worst, sort of IT infrastructures there is for any industry, and
Hmm.
it's just sitting there. It's like, hey, here, come take our data. Just here, we'll
Yeah.
crack the door open a little bit because we don't know any better, and we don't hire the talent, we don't have the budgets, you know. I have a friend who's an IT professional, and he works at a Fortune 500 company. He said to me very I mean, half jokingly, but he actually was serious. He's like, yeah, no one wants to go into hospital IT unless you don't have a choice.
Oh, wow.
He
It's
literally
that
said,
bad.
he's been doing this about 15 years now, and he always gets offers from hospital systems, and he's like, no, I have options. Like,
Hmm.
and I was a little surprised when he said that, but then I thought about it. I was like, yeah, it seems like every upgrade is a downgrade whenever something happens. And I don't know, like, if we can have a technology like blockchain to help with some of these problems, I mean, just like what you were saying with the payer issue, I feel it would go a long way, but I'm not sure how to get the buy-in. Like, how do you make that case so compelling that, the CFO of a hospital system, or, the C-suite of an insurance company says, okay, we'll pay you for this at the end of the day.
Yeah. It has to be painful enough, right? That the solution is really the best solution out there. And it's not just healthcare. A lot of people want to see the validation of the technology. Like, let me see where it's actually being used in
Hmm.
this specific use case. That's what I hear all the time. Can you show me how it's being used now and how it's being applied to an XYZ specialty sector area? So it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of education, right? Saying, okay, well, cryptography isn't really like brand spanking new. And
Hmm.
I'm definitely not an engineer by any means. So I will not speak on all the beauties of it, but it's been around for a while. But yeah, I think part of it is that this specific technology is moving forward in finance
Hmm.
faster than in other sectors. So, and healthcare is tough. It's a tough beast really to crack. Like, there are a lot of legacy systems that are in place that were expensive, a lot of manpower put into it to implement it. So it's hard to let go of one thing and move on to another when there's a lot of risk. And at this point, it's early. It's an emerging technology. It's very
Hmm.
early. So it's just something to keep on people's radars. That's sort of why I think it's interesting, because if you look outside of healthcare, that's really where the magic is happening, and it's specifically in finance.
Yeah.
If you look more in fintech, it's like, wow, we can do all these things without a bank, without
Yeah. It's
having,
it's amazing. It really
yeah.
is.
And it's really impactful for people who have been unbanked for how many years, right? For whatever reason. So it's just interesting to see its applications outside of healthcare. And healthcare is risk adverse, as we spoke about earlier,
Hmm.
for good reason. So anything that hasn't been validated multiple times, it will take a little bit of time for it to be implemented within healthcare. But if you think beyond just like, okay, I said credentialing on the patient side, electronic medical records obviously is a big use case. For insurances, I would say, is like claims adjudication, that whole cycle of saying a claim has been created, who owes what, and closing all of that loop. Like, the payers want to close that loop too, as much as the physician does. Like, whoever needs to get paid has to get paid in a timely manner. Whoever owes something needs to pay that other person or company,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, that whole revenue cycle has to be closed at some point, and that obviously has a lot of pain points from different angles. And then even if you think beyond that, is pharmaceutical companies, right?
Hmm.
The whole track and trace. There's all these issues with counterfeit medications and counterfeit anything, right? products, devices, you want to make sure that your product is the right product, and it's going through and reaching the people and patients that need to have that product. So that's also another use case of being able to track something along the supply chain to say this is what it is supposed to be in the end.
Are you seeing any particular companies or startups or even early stage, early revenue stage companies that are looking into these particular problems that people should look at, be like as an example, if at the least, of like, hey, here's a group of people that are trying to solve XYZ problem?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a coalition of payers that have gotten together to deal with credentialing. But even I would say outside of that, if you think about the basics of it, it comes down to identifying somebody and identifying something. So if you take that as a base layer, so that's like identifying or identity, that could be applied to anywhere or anything. A big thing too is if you look at social media, right? Like who are the experts and how do they get compensated, right? Like there's so many middle players. I always see these influencers, and I follow fashion a lot. So I see these influencers that are almost leaking money because they don't get the full revenue of whatever they're doing. There's always these like cuts, right? And I'm sure in the end, this they would rather be paid more. If they're producing the content, they should be recognized and incentivized to do such. But there's all these middle companies that are getting in the way of what they're doing and who they're trying to target. So then that's like what they say peer-to-peer, right? Like you're just trying to interact with another peer. You don't want all these middle players to get in the way and extract all of these coins. It could be a coin, it could be fiat, whatever. But in the end, you're just trying to connect with another peer and engage in some sort of way that you don't need a middle person. So it really could be applied to anywhere. It also, I mean, if you think of journalism, that's a huge thing of content creation, but housing that value for that journalist, like whoever's producing that content, and not having it be extracted in all sorts of forms. It's just it's endless basically how this could be applied. But like I said, in healthcare, I would say those are like the top things that come to mind that we'll start seeing very quicker than in other ways. But also sort of on an educational part of the technology is fine. You have that peer-to-peer layer, right, of transacting and having that ledger, that history taking that's already ingrained. So there's that. But then there's layers that are built upon that. So there's smart contracts that you can build upon that, which are basically, if anybody's like a math fan, if this, then that. That's basically what it is if this happens, then that happens. But it's all on code and it's all stored that way. So you can't argue with the code. It's math basically. So you add that layer, and then you can add a financial layer, right? Of how you exchange and what value that has. So there's so many things that can be applied onto this technology that I found fascinating, because when I first was entering and like, I'm really curious about digital health, I said, what can really impact a lot of people? That's what I was more fascinated. And it's not sexy by any means. Like the middleware is not sexy. People want something tangible, like, wow, I see this and it's so cool. Like VR, AR, mixed MR now, right? Like mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality. That's something that's very tangible and it's very attractive, I think, because you can see the direct effects and you can feel them. But it's this technology, blockchain, it's not something that's like, I really wanted to be expert in this, and specifically in healthcare, because it's like, what? That's so random, right?
Well, it's hard for people to relate, right? I mean, like I think Apple spoiled us, right, with the, these AirPods
Yeah,
and the,
I
the
have it
beauty,
here too.
yeah, the beautiful aesthetics of it, and it's so easy to use. And I think everybody, I think this is one of the issues that I've heard a lot of people talk about in the digital health space, even apart from blockchain, is the whole direct to consumer pathway, to getting products out and adoption. It's a different struggle compared to, I mean, not to say this is easy to make. It's very hard to make these devices, but Apple, like companies like Apple, they have that brand and they built it and they cultivated it, and so now it's like they just have to throw the pebble in the water, and all of a sudden the ripples are huge, and so it's hard to make that argument in healthcare. It's people want the B2B enterprise sales because it's a bigger chunk of revenue and et cetera. And like you said, it's not sexy. Middleware and the boring things tend to become the things that may actually solve problems, but it's hard to market them as exciting sometimes. You're just like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
we have this amazing ledger, and someone looks at you like, what? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's it? That's what this is? And you're like, no, but the downstream effects are big. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with these type of technologies, because they don't have that thing in hand where you're like, wait, what exactly does this do?
Mm-hmm.
Or even for people like yourself who are very well versed in potential uses, I think some people may be like, you know what, I have a problem for us, I have a solution for this, a problem that may be helpful. How do I even how do I get a partner with an engineer? Like, like, do you have advice for people that actually have ideas and they want to at least prototype, or they want to even find out if there's a market for it? How do you even get a blockchain engineer in part of your to answer an email? Or
Oh boy, yeah.
it's hard, right? Because these are different worlds that you're intersecting.
Networking. That's all I could say. Yeah, a lot of this comes from word of mouth. I would say if you look at all of the founding team members of any
Mm-hmm.
company, majority of them probably knew each other by some means, and or knew of, they were separated maybe by a second degree, third degree. It's like the Kevin Bacon, 6
Yeah.
degrees to Kevin Bacon. It's probably not that far, but
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
any beginning company, those foundational folks usually knew each other, or they have someone that they could recommend. So I would say it's definitely like, okay, just keep speaking to people within the space, and eventually you'll land that CTO that you've been looking for.
And one thing going back to what we talked about earlier, about you love traveling, and you've seen a lot of parts of the world that maybe other people haven't, because I know on your LinkedIn profile you said you like remote international travel. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear at this point, both from a professional standpoint with these technologies being adopted, outside the Western hemisphere and the US market, but also to kind of understand, like, what parts of the world have you seen that both this type of tech could be useful, but also you would just recommend people going, off the beaten path, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, specific for physicians, I would recommend any sort of international practice, mission, however you want to label it as.
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate enough to be at, let's see, yeah, 2 institutions that allowed for me to go and practice medicine outside of like a regular mission. It was usually a mission like, at least now that we're done, it's almost volunteer, right? Because you've already completed your specialty, and now you just want to give back in a very specific way to a very specific community. But I think early on, it's important to really see how medicine is practiced in other places. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter where, but at least, even I've been with folks in residency fellowship that have never even left their institution, never mind like left the country to practice. So
Yes,
even
I
just
know
to
some
get
people
that,
like that.
you know that, right? Yeah, I
Yes.
knew
Oh yeah.
people like that. Like they did undergrad there and med school, residency, like you name it, and they're still there. And I just find that so it it really closes your vision very quickly, because you feel like this is the only way it is and can be. But when you leave your institution, you leave the country, I, like I said, so I was involved with two institutions that gave me the ability to work in a medical capacity abroad, three
Hmm.
places, and they were very different from each other. But even before I was able to finish, getting to the finish line, I was able to see, wow, this is how medicine is practiced is different. And here are the things that should change, can change, maybe that we in the US are not doing properly.
Hmm.
Gives you that perspective. So that's even outside of technology. You have to kind of open your mind to seeing what's happening outside of your institution, outside of the country. Just to say, like, okay, I've had some experience in these other health systems or countries and how they practice medicine and what's being incentivized there. So that's step one, is just getting that perspective. And then for traveling outside of medicine, yes, it comes down to curiosity. Like, not a lot of people really want to do the non-touristy things or be
Yeah.
outside the tour groups. So
Yeah.
there is some sort of adventurous spirit that perhaps you may or may not, because I do recognize safety is an issue being a
Hmm.
female. So you may not want to venture off too far from what's kind of structured and okayed by the tour group. But I think just observing, like going back to we were talking about before, is having that um, sit down, observe what's going on around you. You don't have to be doing something at every single minute when you're traveling, but just being able to sit down and slow down and just watch what's happening around you. That's really important as well. You don't have to go anywhere fancy to do that. You can literally prop up anywhere that you happen to be at and just take a look around you and seeing what are people doing and how it's different from home. It's
What?
very basic.
Yeah. So, what's a very memorable or meaningful experience that you had that, may have changed your outlook on life, or just had a very deep impact on you that you'd love to share?
Oh boy.
I'm sure there's more than one, but I think people love hearing about that type of experience. I think it's very motivational. It motivates me. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I would say it has to go back to medicine. So I'll pick from one of the experiences I had abroad while practicing medicine, and it wasn't on a random travel. Um, that at the very heart of medicine is that empathy, right?
Hmm.
I remember rounding on, and the hospital was very, very humble. Like it's
Where was
nothing
this?
that
Where was
in
this?
in Mwanza, Tanzania. So
Tanzania. Okay.
yeah, and it was basically like, if you look at the map, so Tanzania is East Africa,
Hmm.
and then Mwanza is close to Lake Victoria.
Okay.
So it's a little further west. Like, most people travel through Dar es Salaam. That's where their major airport is, and then you kind of have to go west to go to Mwanza. And it's not a small place. Like there is like a city center, but the hospital was more,
Hmm.
outside the beaten track. But I would say that, yeah, the hospital itself was humble. Nothing that I'd experienced anywhere really. But at the very root of it was just being there for a patient, even though I maybe couldn't technically, do anything GI at that time. But I would say that just the oncology wards, it was definitely like wow, it was end stage. Like this was not, people didn't have access to chemotherapy, radiation, none of that. It was basically palliative at that point. If someone that got cancer, it was palliative. And there were people there, and one woman in particular was my age, and just seeing her, yeah, I mean, there's nothing to do other than that. How this at the time.
Sorry, before another technical glitch we just had, you were mentioning.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah,
you were
gotta love
mentioning a
technology,
young
right?
woman.
Yeah. So
You
there
were
was a
mentioning
young
a young
woman,
woman. Yeah.
and yeah, so she had, she was unfortunately dying of cancer. She happened to be my age, so obviously, like, that puts you personally, like, wow, what would that feel like? This is someone that's at your same exact age, going through a lot, and any of that. How's the connection? Is it still? I think I'm freezing.
It got glitchy.
Is it still frozen? Yeah, I think so. Oh no.
Okay, we had a little technical glitch there again. What we were talking about was a meaningful experience you had when you were in Tanzania, and how the oncology ward that you were taking care of patients at was very different than what we experience here in the United States. And so I think you want to continue from there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And I'll try to be fast about the story in case we get
No,
disconnected
yeah, that's
again.
fine. I'll edit in post processing.
Okay. But yeah, so there was a specific patient that I have in mind that who was the same age as me, and really there was no option for her because there chemotherapy, radiation, none of it was, one was an option, but even two would have been an option if it was caught early. So it was just really about making her comfortable. And it's almost like feeling naked as a doctor because you don't have your tools and your
Mm-hmm.
toolkit and your toolbox. But it really goes back to what medicine, it reminded me, it kind of forced me to go back to what it is all about. And really it's just about the human connection. And I would stay by her side, and I was there visiting as much as I could, off regular rounds, just to be there. And really, I think she appreciated that. I think, I know I did. I got
Yeah.
probably more out of that interaction than she did, but I think it forced me to go back to our roots of what being a doctor is really all about. Aside from the bells and whistles, what it is about being a healer, and what that means if you don't have anything to give, right? If you don't,
Mm-hmm.
and literally, like, there were no things, like pressers weren't a thing. So the people in the ICU they were really struggling. The family members would have to bag because the electricity would go out. Maybe someone donated epi, but that was like far and few. So resources wise, it's like you have to just use what you can. And really, people in the military are great about this. They know how to be resourceful when there aren't any things. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized, wow, I feel so fortunate in having to have been trained where I did train, but at the same time, I was so unprepared to be in a
Yeah.
situation where I didn't have all those gadgets and yeah, treatments. And obviously, like, now I have scopes. So you're so bare, and you just become a human again.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's an experience you can't ever forget, right? I mean, and I think especially this year with the amount of isolation, a lot of people have felt
Mhm.
a lot of, people I mean, hundreds and thousands of people have died just in the U.S. alone. Many of whom that no one was there by their side. And
Right.
I remember, I've read a few stories, seen a few news reports of just the nurses and some physicians and some residents, and they would just sit by the person who's dying
Hmm.
as a proxy for just someone, their son or daughter or wife, husband couldn't be there because of the precautions and the situation, and this stranger, two strangers essentially, are there for one person, that one of them, as they die. And to have that feeling as, unfortunately, the norm in certain parts of the world, where you can't do anything. And like you said, you feel naked. You feel helpless as a caregiver, whether you're a physician, a nurse, or or any kind of healthcare provider. Um, and it makes me wonder that a lot of technology that we use, in our practices and whatnot, is there any role for any of this emerging tech in these areas where,
Hmm.
we run into the bureaucracy known as the Western Hemisphere, basically here, but there, I mean, what do you think? Like, some, maybe not blockchain, but just something that's even not as high tech, let's say, low tech solutions. Do you see them being implemented there? What are the major pain points or bottlenecks in having more suffering alleviated in those type of places in developing areas of the world?
Well, for one, they are implementing it back with, because I think that that has almost a bigger impact for people who have had nothing. So you're leapfrogging, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you don't have systems that you have to tangle with,
Mm-hmm.
you're going from nothing. Like, very, I think what's interesting is that in the frontier markets, emerging, developing markets, they are taking and adopting these emerging technologies. And it's really interesting to see it, because for them, it's really impactful, right? If you have nothing and then all of a sudden you have something,
Yeah.
that's huge, right? Like and that leapfrog from having nothing to something that's so almost futuristic, it's easier to do that than having to deal with let's say, take for example healthcare, right? If you're still on paper charts, even if that, right, not even just kind of by memory, yes, I kind of know this person from their
Sure.
history, and then you go to like blockchain based electronic medical record, it's almost easier to do that
Yeah. You
than
don't.
having to unravel all of the other things that are in place that have to be broken or changed almost in order to implement that something new. If you have nothing and you're implementing something, that something happens to be something very advanced, it's so much easier to do that.
Well, this is very akin to a lot of developing nations. So India is a great example. I'm from India, and I have a lot of family still back there. And I saw, I mean, we went every few years or so, and the landlines, telephone landlines, never took that much hold there. Like in America, everyone had a phone in their home. It was like, it
Hmm.
was tethered to the wall. I still remember when growing up in Queens, we had that old beige looking whitish telephone that's nailed to the wall, and we had this
Hmm.
real long extension cord. No one, not many people had that over there. And all of a sudden, the cell phone, the cell data infrastructure just blew up internationally. And so now everyone has a mobile device, right? So you don't need it. I mean, I mean, from the kids that would come to our car to beg for money, they all had Motorola's. And when I
Wow.
saw that for the first time, I'm like, what is going on here? But these are like inflection points. There was no legacy system to disrupt.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting because I've talked to other entrepreneurs and even investors where this discussion comes up to where if those are the places of the world that have the needs, the pain points, where technology can really leapfrog, as you said, how can more people focus on those parts of the world as far as setting up companies that would help there? Because I think a lot of people, they look at America and say that, okay, this is a huge market, right? Because most founders are they want for-profit companies. And I, I feel, and again, this may be my ignorance, how does one scale a company in a developing part of the world when just the simple equation of the $1 equals tens or hundreds of the local currency, you know, people at the end of the day, they're like, well, how do I get paid to solve this problem?
Mhm.
And in America, we have what we discussed. We have all these legacy systems. We have a lot of bureaucracy. There's this old guard, so to speak, that you have to get past. All these other places, like you say, in Tanzania, they're ripe for like leapfrogging. But yet, why don't we see more investment there? And is it because you're not making the dollar or euro return compared to whatever the local currency is, or do you feel there's other factors?
I think there's a couple of factors. In the end, you always want to de-risk your investments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't understand the climate from a regulatory, also political standpoint, then it's a little bit difficult, I think, for an investor to say, sure, let me invest in a market that I have really no good handle on. So there's that aspect of, well, can the economy there be destabilized at any given point? Like that, I don't know. There's
Mm-hmm.
that. And then just simply not knowing culturally what would be useful, right? If you there has to be some sort of desire to affect change in a specific location that is not where you live, right? Either you're from there, you have some connection there
Mm-hmm.
somehow. There has to be some sort of understanding of what the people need and the culture, and if it's a cultural fit with the product. All these things have to be taken into place, and it's difficult to do that if you've never been to the place, you don't know anybody from the place.
Yeah.
There's all of those things that have to be considered, but I think it is about de-risking the investment and having a clear handle of how um, what that would look like in the future in terms of that particular country's economy and how stable it is.
Yeah. No, I think these are good points, but there are also opportunities, right? For those who are willing to at least
There
venture
are.
out there and learn and go through network, as you said. I mean, networking is huge, um, and I think it's. I think we've hit on a lot of great points in this discussion, and it's definitely been very motivational to me. I'll tell you that. If no one else, at least you've helped me see things a little bit more clearly. And so I hope everyone else that's listening and watching, they find this very valuable. So I wanted to thank you for that. Um, how can people learn more about you? How can they follow you? Contact you potentially if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always open. And I would say social media wise, I'm always kind of hanging out in different places at different times. So right now, I would say LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I pop here and there into Instagram, but I would say LinkedIn is probably the best because I probably would see it a little bit quicker than anywhere else. I do have a website and I'm on Twitter, but again, I think if you happen to also be on LinkedIn, find me there.
Sure, and I'll put that link in the show notes. Um, Last question: what are you looking forward to most in 2021?
More human interaction, I have to say. It goes back to that story that I had that I was talking about that patient, but there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue. At some point, it's nice to have and hold your loved ones, even though, especially those that you haven't seen
Hmm.
because of what's been happening. And obviously, when things are safer and it's allowed, really, because I don't want to, impinge on anybody's borders, really, if it's not allowed. But I think just having that human interaction again, that's what I am craving at this point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us are, and I mean people have cabin fever and Zoom fatigue, and there's all these new hashtags that have emerged this year that I don't think anybody would have ever thought we we would be in this situation. But yeah, I'm optimistic for 2021. I mean, it's right around the corner, and two vaccines are out, probably another third on the horizon, and yeah, I'm hoping by next summer, there's somewhat of a progression towards more social and social interaction, human interaction that's
Hmm.
more positive and safer than it has been. So, Samantha, thanks so much for your time, for your insight. I think this is great. Um, any last thoughts?
I think it's, if anything, it just, this whole experience from this year has really stripped us down to our human basic needs of, we just need to be together, right? That's all that matters in the end. Whether you're a physician, a patient, anybody, that's all we could take from this to say that's really what's the most valuable thing.
Definitely, definitely. Well, on that note, we are going to sign off. So thank you everyone for listening and watching.